All right. So it's noon. And so welcome again, friends, and welcome Brooksides for our part 4 of functional nutrition. And today we are going to discuss the importance of nutrition in alleviating stress. So welcome, Brooke.
Thank you. And I just want to check that everybody can see the PowerPoint.
And no, I just see Zoom.
Oh, okay. Let me reshare. It looks on my end like it was showing, but let me try that again.
Here it is. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And as we get started, I'm just going to share a couple things before I kind of launch into the topic today, which is on diet and stress response. So we're going to talk about the physiology of the stress response and then some of the foods that can support the body to have a healthier stress response. And we will get a little bit into supplements too. But before we get going on that, feel free if you have questions to put them in the chat box, and Magda and I will periodically check that, and I can also make sure that at the end we check to see what questions there are and get those answered. So I am a licensed professional counselor and also a functional nutrition practitioner, and have a practice called Evolve Wellness and Counseling, and always loved doing classes and talks, and have been always, basically over the years, have always enjoyed just education. And so I love that you're all here, and hopefully you get kind of some takeaways, because stress is a pretty big topic. And there's been, I think, just so much stress over the last few years with the pandemic and figuring out kind of how to process that. What I hear from a lot of clients and people over the past few months is that as things kind of feel more normal to some degree, and the world feels a little more open than it was for a couple of years, that there's like left with kind of the discomfort of making choices about what to do, and maybe things that occurred over the past 2 years, and that stress can live in our body a little bit. And so I always like, there's this term, stress management. I always like to use the term stress transformation. How do we process that and allow it to maybe leave instead of just manage something that's always there? So we'll kind of circle back to that topic towards the end. For now, we're going to get into this feeling of stress. I do want to say, because I will mention some different nutritional supplements in this class, and I don't think I have as much in the previous few weeks of classes that we've done, that none of this information is meant to diagnose or treat. And if you are taking prescription medications and you want to try any of the nutraceuticals that we talk about towards the end of the class, to make sure to check with your pharmacist just on contraindications, because sometimes there can be some with certain medications. So we all know that we don't like feeling stressed or stressed out, but and with that feeling can come, chronic anxiety and lots of other issues that we're dealing with. And so let's talk more about what's going on inside our bodies when we do feel like we're under stress. And I will also say, there's stress as a term, and you can put this in the chat box if you'd like. A lot of times, like when I say the word stress, what do some of you think of? What does stress mean? Like the definition of stress?
I think there could be positive stress and negative stress.
Yeah, eustress and distress. Yep. And I bring this up because a lot of times we talk about stress as we combine stressors and stress in the body as one thing, but really they're two separate things. So a stressor is the thing in our life that we perceive as a threat. And that causes a stress response in the body. And so I'll try to differentiate between those two things as we go through the class, because I hear the word like I'm stressed, which usually means like I'm feeling a stress response in my body, right? But sometimes we have I'm sure some of you have had this happen, where the same stressor happens at two different times in our life, and we have a strong response to it one time, and another time it doesn't feel like such a stressful thing. And it may be due to our perception, right? So the first thing that happens when our body goes into a stress response is that the brain sends a signal to our adrenal glands. There is a perception that something is threatening. And in turn, when that signal gets sent to our adrenal glands, and there's some other things that happen. So I'm going kind of zooming out and giving you like a general picture of what's going on. Our adrenal glands will release adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline is our short-term, quick stress hormone. It's the first thing, and it's secreted really fast, because if somebody pulls in front of us in the street, we need to put our foot on that brakes rapidly. And that's adrenaline that helps you do that. And some of you may feel, some people will notice like the sensation of a whole wave of adrenaline that comes, and then cortisol never really comes, which feels like a wave that's then like, oh my gosh, that was scary, but it's over. And my body's like kind of recovering from this whole output of adrenaline. Cortisol, and I'm going to ask you a question that you can respond to in the chat box. How long, cortisol is our long-term stress hormone. So how long do you think it takes for the body to identify, oh, this is long-term and I need to put out cortisol? Do you think it's minutes? Do you think it's hours, days, weeks? What would the body identify as long-term stress? And it needs to start secreting cortisol. See one answer, days, couple hours. Yeah, that is what I would have thought too, is that it would be days or hours. And that's what our mind, I think up here, we are very resilient and we find ways to cope with a lot of things for longer periods of time. But our body identifies long-term stress as 1 to 2 minutes. Like once we've had that stressor going for a minute, we're going to start having an output of cortisol. For some people, maybe closer to 2 minutes, but there's like 1 to 2 minutes and we start outputting cortisol. And with that, we may still have adrenaline, but we now have cortisol because we put our foot on the brakes, right? Oh, thank goodness, it's over. We don't get that cortisol output. But if something goes on longer, which happens a lot in life, then we get that extra minute or two, and now we have an increase in cortisol. And we'll talk more about cortisol today. So let's say, that feeling of like that quick stressor comes and then it's over. Once we get away from that threat, or that threat is over, our body has a natural parasympathetic response. And what I mean by that is that our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight portion of our nervous system. So when we are in a threat response, we're in our sympathetic nervous system. When we're relaxed, we're in our parasympathetic. And so sometimes that's referred to as rest and digest, and sympathetic's referred to as fight or flight. And so we get this nice parasympathetic relaxation response after a stressor ends. And this is one of the explanations for why exercise can reduce stress, is that we are actually inducing sympathetic activation, or in other words, inducing a stress response in the body. And after that exercise, we naturally get this nice parasympathetic response. One little takeaway with exercise is that we live in a life that's so fast paced now that sometimes we just like skate over that nice relaxation response, because we get done with the exercise, we grab a coffee, we jump in the car, and we like run to the next thing while we're on the phone. And so I would invite you, when you exercise and you notice maybe a little bit of a feeling of calm or relaxation after that exercise, to see if you can honor that a little bit in some way. even if you are kind of driving or going to the next place, see if you can like let some calm music play in the car and notice the trees and kind of take it easy while you're driving instead of maybe trying to, listen to things or whatever we might be doing that's kind of speeding past that, to kind of honor that post-exercise relaxation if possible. So some stress is healthy. We tend to think of stress as a negative thing, but we need some degree of stress. I was just talking with my brother about one benefit of kids in athletics or in things that induce a little bit of competition is that there can be a benefit. Sometimes we learn better under a healthy degree of stress because adrenaline and cortisol work together to help create new connections in the brain. And so in terms of kids in athletics, we were talking about like a healthy competition, right? Can actually help them to be stimulated, to learn, create memories, improve their mood. Another reason why exercise can feel really good is that it can be stimulating to all these things. It can improve our mood. It can encourage us to feel creative, to be in a space where we can learn. And that is why we're going to see this a little bit later. The flow of cortisol through a 24-hour period, it rises naturally for a good reason, because we want to get up and be able to feel optimal and have energy and be able to learn and make a difference maybe in our lives day to day with the people around us. So it's not all a bad thing, but we do see that if this gets dysregulated, it can lead to symptoms that we don't want. Some other important roles that cortisol has in the body: it tells the liver to produce glucose. And so this is another important thing when we see the flow of cortisol throughout the day, I will circle back to. So know that when cortisol is a little higher, it's helping liberate stored energy so that we can keep our blood sugar stable throughout the day. It has immune modulating effect in our body, meaning it can help with a balanced immune response. It regulates fluid balance in the body. It also, I mentioned how it can work with adrenaline to help create memories, and really, really important in our sleep cycle. So we see this a lot with people working like shift work or odd hours, that it can be really difficult to sleep deeply and feel awake when we're trying to be awake, because that circadian rhythm is so important for our sleep and our wake cycles. So in this, I'm just moving something out of the way here. In this little chart here, this is the flow of cortisol through 24 hours. So around 2 a.m., our cortisol starts to go up, and it peaks around 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. And it's going to be a little different. It will adjust based on our typical routine, but it will peak 30 minutes. This is like a very general picture, but it does a little like, there's something that when we're looking at an adrenal stress index test that we would want to see that 30 minutes after rising, there's a little spike that shows that the adrenals are like responding in a healthy way. Like my alarm went off, I got up, and within 30 minutes, my cortisol popped up to get me going for the day. So that's a good thing. And then throughout the day, it starts to drop. And what's not shown here is that mid-afternoon, there's a little dip in cortisol and then a little peak, and then it starts to drop back down by the end of the day. And so if any of you feel tired mid-afternoon, your energy drops a little bit, that is normal. It is why Spain is so smart to have a siesta and kind of it really honors our normal circadian rhythm to take a rest mid-afternoon and then get going again and use that little bump in energy for the rest of the day. If you feel that dip, if any of you here like definitely feel that drop in energy mid-afternoon, it's usually when we want to pick up sugar or coffee or something stimulating to try to keep going. I would suggest something with protein, something with healthy fat, and also water, like hydration. And then the other piece on the lifestyle side is if you can take a break, if you have like a break mid-afternoon or even 10 minutes that you can go outside and shut your eyes for a minute or sit in the car or take a little walk, just do something to like disconnect for 5 to 10 minutes. If any of you, I've always had this experience of being on road trips, you know, and you're driving for lots of hours and you start to feel really tired and you pull over to a rest stop and you kind of just turn off the car and close your eyes for 10 minutes. How much like 5 to 10 minutes of just stopping and fully resting. Sometimes I will only take 5 minutes and then it's like, wow, I feel so much better than I did, 10 minutes ago. And it can be really rejuvenating. And we just tend to not do that because what happens, you all can put this in the chat box. What do you do when you have a break? I have a guess of what some people are going to say because I see it happen a lot and I do it myself sometimes. What do you do when you stop working or you take a break from activities? What do you turn to? So like, oh, I need to take a break.
Well, the wrong answer is probably social media.
It's not wrong. It's just, yeah, it may, or I should say, it's probably not the healthy thing to do, but it is, I think, what happens a lot, right? It's like, let me check my phone real quick. Favorite TV show, sleep. Yeah, sleep may not be a bad thing, can be a good thing, but yeah, if it's kind of taking over and you feel like it's not restful and rejuvenating and energy stays low. Oh, I'm so sorry that there's one response in the chat box. I am stressed just talking about this. Well, I hope in the latter part of the class, we get to some things that feel de-stressing, that help you de-stress, but I understand that. Yeah, so a lot of times there's so many things that we can use to distract and they can be really stimulating and not actually really help us relax. And so I am just as much I think this is a really hard thing for all ages, adults included, is to, I'm done with an appointment or a meeting. And so let me just pick up my phone and then we check, we're maybe checking email, but like we get distracted by some other notification on there. And then the time is up and we're on to the next thing. And so the only way I know to like fully combat that is mindfulness and having maybe a list of a few things on your computer. This helps some people is to have it on the fridge if that's where they get distracted, or on their computer is like 3 things to do to just take a break, like a real break, right? Close my eyes for 3 minutes, go look out the window for a minute. It doesn't have to be a lot and it can be pretty powerful to help the mind just have a moment to relax and de-stress. If you have other ideas, throw them in the chat box because it's always helpful for all of us to hear what ideas we have that work. So this is our flow of cortisol throughout the day. In the evening, it's going to keep dropping until about 2 a.m. And when I mentioned how cortisol helps liberate stored energy from the body, when we eat dinner, we have our blood sugar is going to go up and our body's going to store away what it needs to store away. And we'll have this like steady blood sugar. Let's say we've had a nice balanced dinner, had some protein, some healthy fats, some veggies, some complex carbs. That fiber and protein is going to help slow down the absorption of sugar into our blood. So we get this nice slow rise of sugar or output of sugar going into the blood that our body is using over time and storing appropriately. And as our blood sugar starts to drop, and it's going to drop all the way till about 2, 3 a.m., then our body is going to, as that cortisol goes up, the cortisol is helping break down stored energy to keep our blood sugar stable until we wake up and eat in the morning. And I mention this because I see this happen where people are getting like middle of the night waking up. And sometimes it has to do with their cortisol level. Maybe when it starts to go up at 2 a.m., some people are getting like this spike because their blood sugar is dropping too much. And it could have to do with what they ate for dinner. And so the dinner meal is both affecting cortisol and blood sugar and causing some night waking or night sweats or like different issues with sleep. I've also seen this other scenario. I've seen it the most with postpartum women where they're waking so much that their cortisol, their circadian rhythm is kind of disrupted for a period of time because they're waking up a lot at night and maybe not getting deep and long sleep. And so in the morning, they're really nauseous and they feel like almost like cold sweat. And what's happening is their cortisol didn't really get up there enough to liberate energy from the body to keep blood sugar stable. So their cortisol's low and their blood sugar's low and they don't feel good. We usually can remedy that with, a later night snack, which is what most of us don't necessarily want to do, but in this case, it can help. So I say all that just to let you know that sometimes sleep issues can go back to a cortisol dysregulation, which could be affecting blood sugar or vice versa. So of course, we're going to have stressors that come up during the day. And in a healthy response, we have time to recover is the takeaway here. We have, maybe a work meeting that feels a little bit stressful. And then we have time to like resettle. And then we go work out and then we have time to resettle. And this is normal. And this would still keep us in a healthy circadian rhythm because we're able to process and recover from those daily stressors.
Brooke, there's a quick question about what kind of role coffee plays with this relationship with cortisol.
Say that again. What kind of
if coffee has any effect on the cortisol levels?
Yes. So caffeine does cause an increase in cortisol. And there are some people, like when some people say they don't tolerate it very well, or they get, it can affect blood sugar too, is what I want to throw in here. Is if it's affecting cortisol and there's kind of a spike and a drop, it sometimes causes some shifts in blood sugar too that leave people not feeling so great. And I think that this is part of some coffee, is more acidic. You can get low acid coffee. You can get mushroom coffee, which also helps balance the pH in the coffee. So there are versions of coffee that are gentler on the gut, but like the higher acid bothers some people directly with their digestion. But also part of the digestive response is some people drink coffee in order to go to the bathroom. And part of that is that it's kind of like revving up, it's increasing our cortisol and it's thermogenic, it's heating up our body, it's getting our metabolism going. And those things can feel beneficial. We also can get adapted to caffeine to where we need more and more of it. It's addictive that way. So a healthy way to use, this is like, I'm going off on a little coffee tangent, but a healthy way to use coffee is to, of course, like 1 to 2 cups a day, kind of avoid getting into the all day coffee thing. But then take breaks periodically, like every few months, take 10 days to 14 days off of coffee. And if you take that time, it allows your receptors to reset so that when you're back on it, you're actually getting an effect from it. But yeah, the answer to that, the simple answer is that it does cause a little spike in cortisol, but some people are more sensitive to that than others. And they probably know. Some of you here probably drink coffee and know that it gets you going and you feel like, oh my gosh, I can only tolerate a half a cup. And there's other people that can drink 4 cups and take a nap. And some of that is also genetics. There's slow metabolizers and fast metabolizers, and slow caffeine metabolizers can't handle much because it stays in their system a lot longer. So as we were looking at this, right, this healthy stress response and having normal stressors that happen in the day and having time to recover, unfortunately, our days are not so simple, right? Technology has changed so much. We get information around the clock. Our emails almost never stop coming. And so it can feel like just one thing after another, and we don't have that recovery time. And so then we feel like this image here, right? And what do you all do? What do we do? What do we do after a stressful day at work? And that's something we can talk about here in a moment. This is just another, picture of some of the things that can feel like stressors: traffic, doing taxes, finances. I love this little, just as someone who has 3 younger children, like I love the image of the two yelling at each other, because you can just so obviously see as adults, we find ways to kind of mask our stress response. Like we've learned how to cope in a way that allows us to function in society pretty well. It may not help our nervous system process it so well, but we might not see it as easily on people when they're stressed. But with kids, it's like so obvious. I watch my kids and I'm like, oh, there goes the threat and there goes the cortisol, and like here's the fight or flight response. And now I'm gonna try to facilitate some recovery and some deactivation, see if we can get there. And I will say, just on that topic, that what I try to do with my kids when I see a stress response happening is the same thing I would do for myself. Like, I think it works well for adults, is we, identify this stressor. And as our cortisol rises in our brain, we've got our prefrontal cortex up here, right? And this is where we reason. As humans, we have this part of the brain where we can reason, we can find meaning, we can have insight, we can make decisions. And then we have this limbic or emotional part of the brain, the middle brain. And then back here, we've got the sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain, or the automatic response. And when we identify a threat and then we have emotions about it, and we might go into automatic behavior, or our body starts responding, and that's where we feel that like stress or anxiety in the body. This part of the brain goes offline. So the part where we reason and make good decisions kind of goes away once we're down into the reptilian part of the brain. And so it's not a good time to try to figure it out. It's a time to figure out, how do I process the stress in my body? And once I do that and I relax, then I can get back to being like, what happened and what do I do about it? Right. And so the first thing I always do with my kids when I see this happening is just take their hands and say, like, let's go look out the window, or let's go outside and just become present. Like, realize as we look around that we're not in a threat anymore, hopefully, right? Most of the time, we're not actively in a threat that moment. We are thinking about something in the future or the past that is threatening. And we might need to deal with that. But first, we can realize that in this moment, I'm, maybe in my house and I'm safe, and let our body kind of resettle. So coming back to this rhythm of cortisol, if we have all these things, right, happening too fast and we're not recovering, we can get into this chronically elevated cortisol. And when I do adrenal stress index tests, we will see where cortisol is through 24 hours. And it's always really interesting, and oftentimes is very reflective of somebody's symptoms. Because if it's up here, they're usually reporting feeling pretty anxious and not sleeping very well. If it's chronically low, they're very tired, not motivated, hard to get out of bed, feel pretty depleted all the time. More often than all high or all low, we'll see it just dysregulated. It might be like too high and first thing, in the middle of the night, but then it's like too low in the morning, and then it kind of creeps up at night and we're having trouble falling asleep. So it's just kind of out of whack. There's some different things we can do for all those scenarios, but first, some signals that our healthy tension has tipped over into stress. You might feel foggy. So again, we go into, if our cortisol is high, we're not going to be thinking really clearly. You might start to feel a little bit like tunnel vision, like you can only focus on one thing at a time. It's hard to zoom out and see the big picture. We might just feel a lot of brain fog. Frequent colds, so immune, we talked about how cortisol is important for immune function. We might start having some more like colds or not feeling optimal. Also can cause aches and pains. People with low cortisol often have more aches and pains, but sometimes high cortisol does that too because we're really tense. Autoimmune flare-ups are common with stress. Elevated heart rate, so if that's happening, or even some like cardiovascular symptoms like arrhythmia and things like that can be related to cortisol levels. Mood swings, certainly digestive distress. We digest in our parasympathetic nervous system, in that relaxation place is where our digestion happens. And I always describe it this way. If we're running from a tiger, we don't need to feed our body or reproduce, right? We need to just make sure we get safe. So for survival, like first we need safety, then we can have our reproductive hormones be working optimally and we can be digesting. And so we need to be relaxed for those things to happen. And I say that because thyroid hormone, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, those levels can all be affected by our cortisol levels. And it's a big thing I'll see with menopause and postmenopause or perimenopause is that there's oftentimes a lot more symptoms, menopausal symptoms when cortisol is dysregulated. So if we can work on adrenal and health, stress, and cortisol, it can help a lot with menopause. Or with fertility, and also true for men's hormones too. Difficulty sleeping is an obvious one. Sometimes it affects appetite. We might have like not hungry at all or excessive hunger. And then focus, if it's like, oh, I used to be able to focus really well and now I sit down at the computer and I just like cannot, my brain's not working that well, that can be a symptom as well. So these are all things that can cause dysregulation of cortisol levels, excessive exercise, low fat diets, which is not as much of an issue I'm finding with people these days, but it was for a long time, recommended to avoid fat. And so if that is still something that's being done, that can dysregulate cortisol. Skipping meals, there's a caveat there because for some people, intermittent fasting works really well and it's appropriate in a number of cases. It's also, though, if somebody is in an adrenal fatigue type of state, meaning that their cortisol is really low, it's probably going to worsen that. So if hormones are low, cortisol is low, I would not skip meals. But for other people, especially if they're diabetic or working on blood sugar or working on insulin resistance, then that can be a really good intervention. So it just depends on the situation. Sleep deprivation, obviously not getting enough sleep is going to be a problem for our circadian rhythm and for cortisol. Anxiety, which can be caused by not processing stress in the body, but it can also be, something external that's affecting our cortisol and we're not and dysregulating it. Nutrient deficiencies. So one example that I'll share here is that vitamin C, we need vitamin C to make cortisol. We also need vitamin C to metabolize glucose, to metabolize sugar. And we need vitamin C for healthy immune function. So I always think of holiday season. Starting at Halloween, like the sugar starts flowing and it goes through Halloween, Thanksgiving, the holiday season, New Year's. We get this like all this extra sugary food and refined flours. And we're using vitamin C to metabolize that sugar. And some people describe the season, the holiday season too, as busy, more activities, travel, things like that. So we use vitamin C up with any extra cortisol, any extra stress. And then we get to like cold and flu season in January, February, March, and everybody gets sick. And it's not due to just this one thing of vitamin C, but I think it's like a player in this, or a good example of we need to know that we need like a lot of extra vitamin C if we're doing all three of those things to keep our immune system optimal. And there's other nutrients that are needed. There's some B vitamins needed. So we use some of those vitamins and minerals to make cortisol, adrenaline, and to process, to support our circadian rhythm. Obviously, external stressors like bullying or stressful social situations or situations at work or in our personal life are going to play into our levels of cortisol and could potentially cause issues. So this is a handout that I've always like kept on hand because it's a really good picture of normal blood sugar and unhealthy blood sugar. And so if we look down at this unbalanced breakfast, the cold cereal, skim milk, orange juice, coffee, which was, for me growing up, a healthy breakfast. It's like what we all had. I'm sure some of you recognize it. It may still be what you have, but it is high in carbohydrates. So if we look at protein, fat, carbs, this is primarily simple carbohydrates, which means that they're going to be absorbed and metabolized into the blood very, very fast. And when we get here, this will help you understand kind of, I think, how much is in there. We need about 1 teaspoon of sugar in our blood at any given time. And this meal, if it was 1.5 cups of Frosted Flakes, a cup of skim milk, an 8-ounce glass of orange juice, and then just plain coffee, would be 73 grams of sugar. Once that breaks down into glucose, we've got 73 grams of sugar in there. And we need, which is 19 teaspoons. We need 1 teaspoon in our blood at any given time. So that's a lot of sugar going into the body at once. And when it goes in like that, and what would slow down the absorption of that is protein, fat, and fiber. And this doesn't have much of any of that. So it's going to go really fast into our blood and spike it too high because it's more sugar than we need. And when that happens, you can see that stress up there above the normal blood sugar. It's stressful to the body because we need to keep our blood sugar in a really tight range. And that's vital for our health. So when it goes up too high, we get an increase of insulin. Insulin is the hormone that's going to help get that out of the blood and into the cells. We get an increase of fat storage, mood swings, and brain fog. And know that there can be, there's this stress happening in the body. So some people feel that as anxiety or as stress. They actually feel stressed when really it is stress in the body, but it's not like mental, emotional stress, but we start feeling maybe there's something happening that is threatening. If it goes that high, it often drops too low, which is also stressful to the body because, again, we need to keep our blood sugar in a tight range. And so then we get this increase of cortisol because remember, cortisol is going to liberate stored energy. So if we get that blood sugar drop, that crash after too much sugar, we get increased cortisol, increased cravings, fatigue, and brain fog. And then oftentimes what happens when it's down there, when our blood sugar is low, is we grab like sugar or something, which is smart in the sense of it'll get your blood sugar back up. But if it's straight sugar, then we end up on this roller coaster of it going too high and plummeting too low and too high and too low. And so ultimately, if you do end up down at the bottom, your takeaway there, if you do have a bunch of sugar and you crash, is protein and healthy fat, veggies, but at least like something with protein. That oftentimes will kind of help stabilize your blood sugar.
So Brooke, are you saying all of this could be achieved is the wrong word, just by drinking coffee? So coffee, just drinking coffee by itself is bad as well for cortisol and insulin and blood sugar?
No, so coffee by itself is not going to do this. Like it's in there with that meal, but that cold cereal and orange juice, especially like the Frosted Flakes and the orange juice are.
Well, no, I'm just worried about the coffee. I don't need.
Oh yeah. I know you're not eating the other things.
No, not anymore. But I just mean like if coffee, because you said or just coffee, so I was just worried about that.
Oh no, if I said that, I didn't mean it to come out that way. But yeah, no, plain coffee might cause a little bit of a cortisol increase, but it shouldn't cause because there's no sugar in it, it's not going to cause this massive blood sugar. Yeah, it might increase blood sugar a little bit, but it shouldn't do it.
Actually, I would like to add, I tried the 1 month of the blood sugar monitor, and it kind of gave me an idea. It is by prescription, and it's like $60 in Walmart. If anybody is interested, that's the cheapest one. And it kind of is attached to your cell phone, so you kind of scan it on the back of your arm, and it kind of gave me an idea, like how my body processes everything, and even during the night. So it's kind of a good tool.
Yeah. And it's the constant blood sugar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the continuous.
But people with mild case of OCD, kind of you wake up at night and you have constant like urge. I have to measure my blood sugar. So
Yeah,
I just did it just for 1 month, but I was okay, so I didn't have to worry about it.
that's awesome. Yeah, those continuous glucose monitors it's good that you shared that, Magda, because they can be very insightful. You can really see how things affect you. Yeah. I remember there's a doctor I know who he wore that just again for his own, just to see how things were kind of affecting him. And he said he was so surprised that he had ice cream one day and it was like a full fat ice cream. And there was a different day at work at lunch at the hospital. He had dried cranberries on his salad, but there was like no other real carb on the salad. It was like vegetables and protein, and then had dried cranberries. He said the dried cranberries spiked his blood sugar more than the ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I
Actually, I also, I mean, like the ice cream is just actually high cream and chocolate, so it doesn't spike my blood either. But my 90-pound dietitian, she said she challenged it, and she had like margarita and chips and salsa, and her blood sugar after the meal was 180.
oh my goodness.
You know, she's this petite, dietitian, anyway. So
It's amazing. Yeah. For everybody here, if you ever want to try to wear one for a month, it can help with motivation quite a bit, I think, because you actually get to see what's happening with different foods. So with chronic stress, we get this constant release of cortisol, and a lot of problems associated with stress are a result of this kind of constant output of cortisol. We're going to talk about what we can do with diet and supplements in a moment, but know that, and especially this is like the counselor side of me talking, we can eat the healthiest diet in the world and we can supplement all the way, through our life. But if we're not sorting out how to transform stress in our life with different things we do, and this can be anything from taking time to unwind at the end of the day, taking a bath, using essential oils at work throughout the day. If we want to like smell something and it helps us kind of take a moment to breathing exercises. I love 4-7-8 breathing. So 4-7-8 breathing has been studied. If you do it for 3 minutes, it helps your body shift from sympathetic into parasympathetic. And so 3 minutes, most of us can find 3 minutes once a day, maybe 3 times a day, or maybe twice a day. Even 3 times a day is just 9 minutes out of our day. And so it's an inhale for a count of 4, a hold for a count of 7, and an exhale for a count of 8. And we just you can set a timer on your phone and just do that for 3 minutes. And sometimes I will notice the first minute I feel like irritated, like I'm not relaxed yet. But by the 3rd minute, something's starting to shift. And I feel like, that deactivation happening. And so that is maybe a simple takeaway from this class if you want to add something in that you can do, but it can be all kinds of things that you're doing too. Like I said, with I feel stressed, I'm going to look out the window, or like connect with nature for a moment. There's a whole list we could go through, but that stuff is super important. And if there's bigger things that are going on in our relationships or our life, to maybe go to counseling or go to somebody that we can kind of process through those things, can be really, really important.
So somebody had a question. How is the breathing called again?
Yeah, it's called, I'll put this in the chat box too, 4-7-8 breathing. Dr. Andrew Weil is who I learned that one from. So he talks about it too. And think of that as the inhale, the hold, inhale, hold, and exhale. Little caveat, if you're actually in sort of a really anxious feeling or a panic attack, I would not hold your breath. Just do 4-8 breathing. Just try to exhale first, and then take a breath in, and then exhale for longer than your inhale. The main thing is to exhale for longer than your inhale. But if you're at home or at work and you're just going to sit down and do a breathing exercise, work on holding your breath too. It can actually increase resilience to stress when we hold our breath.
And somebody had a question about the continuous blood sugar monitor. It's by prescription. So talk to your physician because somebody needs to interpret the readings. So, it has to be, it's by prescription.
Mm-hmm. So in here, some early stages of chronic stress. We talked about some of those. There may be an accumulation of visceral fat if that's like a new thing, noticing some extra fat on the belly or around the middle. High blood pressure, anxiety. Some later stages may be fatigue, depression. And the reason that's later stages is if our cortisol is up here, sometimes eventually it starts to drop and it starts to get, and it gets a little bit complicated to explain how this happens, but our body has so many ways of trying to fix dysregulation, and our pituitary gland will start to change the receptors to cortisol. So we get something called cortisol resistance, similar to insulin resistance, where we may be making cortisol, but we're not really responding to it. And so we feel really, really tired. And so that happens in later stages where there's more of like a burnout feeling. There can also, high cortisol does actually damage our brain cells. And so we can have a little bit of brain cell atrophy, inflammation, autoimmunity, allergies, osteoporosis, low blood sugar. Fasting might be hard. So we might not be able to like do intermittent fasting and notice that like that just doesn't work for us. So if it leads to all these things, and we don't want to have our memory affected or our muscle mass decreased or our ability to learn, let's talk about some things that we can do to manage this or transform this and help, right? Because we can't get rid of all of the stressors in our life, right? They're going to happen. And so what do we do to help our body better deal with those? And so again, I already mentioned the thing about skipping. I wouldn't skip meals if you're having a lot of anxiety, stress, or fatigue. Like if you feel like some of this speaks to you right now, I would work on getting 3 solid meals a day. Over time, you might be able to then intermittent fast. But if you're feeling a lot of these symptoms, I would just kind of do 3 regular meals. Eat foods that promote balanced blood sugar. So that means like a palm-sized portion of protein, some healthy fat, some complex carbohydrates. That can be things like sweet potatoes, brown rice, veggies, lots of veggies, squash. And then consume functional foods that have ingredients that can help our brain deal with things more appropriately. And it brings us back to what we talked about during the gut health class we did a couple weeks ago, fermented foods. Fermented foods can help our brain better deal with stress. And I did talk about in that class how probiotics do help us actually have more resilience to stressors. So including things like cultured, like sauerkraut or kimchi or kefir, yogurt, kombucha, things that give us good probiotics. We can take a probiotic too, are good to include. Our brain is 60% fat. We need cholesterol also to make cortisol and to make hormones. And so eggs, wild caught fish can give us omega-3s, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, nuts and seeds in general, olives, eggs, can all give us healthy fats that are going to help our brain function well. Adequate protein, I always kind of throw out this portion of a palm-sized portion of protein at each meal. And again, foods that support healthy blood sugar. So minimizing refined sugars and flours, making sure we're getting those other things I mentioned and minimizing sugar. And the eating regularly thing can be important for a while. I see this a lot where as we work, maybe in counseling or in our own, personal work of doing stress transformation type of practices, and we're responding in a healthier way maybe to stress, and we're doing these other things with food, that we're able to go longer between meals and not feel symptoms. And so oftentimes I always say, wellness and nutrition is it's a lifelong journey. So it changes over time depending on what's happening in our body. I kind of have mentioned that a few times because I will see this happening with intermittent fasting, because it can be such a great thing for some people, but I've also seen people pushing through it when it's not serving them. So it's important to know that sometimes it's healthy and sometimes it's not. Some supplement options for stress are ashwagandha is an adaptogenic herb that's calming. That can be a nice one. B complex vitamins. We need a number of B vitamins just to make cortisol and regulate the HPA axis, which helps balance our cortisol. And so taking a B complex, you can take that in a multivitamin or just in a B complex. Magnesium glycinate is a good, it's very calm since magnesium is considered the calming mineral. You can take that at night, it can help with sleep. L-theanine is an amino acid that helps with sort of a focused calm. And that can be nice to take, especially during the day. That is in green tea, so we get a little bit of theanine in green tea. Phosphatidylserine, on the bottle, it will say PS, because it's a long word. That is actually helps clear cortisol out of the blood when it's high. So if it feels like we're sort of go all day and our system won't calm down, phosphatidylserine can be a good one to help promote more of a feeling of calm and regulate cortisol throughout the day.
And we have a little question here. And before I ask, I want to share my experience with L-theanine. Yeah. It was a game changer for me, late in the afternoon, I take it. And it helps me not only with focus, but also thinking about food. It's kind of, and then also sometimes when for a crazy reason, if I wake up at 4 a.m., I take it and it kind of calms me down back to sleep again. So it's a really good supplement. And somebody has a question about, can vegan diet support decrease elimination of meat in diet? So somebody, I don't know, asking about if vegan diet supports elimination of meat. I don't really understand the question fully.
Yeah, maybe if you can clarify that question in the chat box. I'm not sure either, although a vegan diet would decrease, that is won't have any animal foods in that diet. So it would eliminate meat in the diet if somebody was doing vegan. As far as stress, I often work with a lot of different personal choices as far as diets to get towards a goal, a health goal. And so it can be an option for sure. We just have to make sure we're getting in a nice balance of protein to carbs to fats with the plant foods that are included. And if I think that there's some reason that we need to get certain nutrients in, that we talk about that. Sometimes that's the case for some people. There was another question. It looks like, I think maybe asking if we can get enough of these things in food. With this slide over here, where we're talking about if you were referring to the probiotics or the fermented foods, absolutely, unless there's strains that have been lost from the microbiome. And we don't typically always know that unless we do a comprehensive stool analysis or a test to see what strains are in there. It is common to lose strains that really used to be in our microbiome. So if that's the case, taking a probiotic or making a yogurt from those strains can be a way to get those in. But as an easy takeaway, we can get lots of good bacteria in fermented foods, and that's a great place to start. And then I see your clarification there with the supplement slide. These things wouldn't be in food. Like ashwagandha is an herb, so these are used more therapeutically. With B complex vitamins, I want to say yes, we should be able to get enough in food, but if we use up B vitamins to metabolize alcohol, sugar, to process stress, and from looking at micronutrient tests over the years, they're typically low for a lot of people that are eating really well. And I think it's because of our lifestyle. it's like the speed of life that we're living is not really what our bodies were meant to do, is to like metabolize as much sugar as we have and stress as we have in life. So the answer is yes, we should be able to get enough food if we're like super relaxed most days and we're eating like a really nutrient dense diet and we're not avoiding and we're avoiding sugar.
And also our soil is getting depleted because of the bad farming practices.
Yeah. That's a really good point too. So and we don't eat the diversity that we used to eat. You know, we have grocery stores with only so many things to pick from. And it might look like a lot to us because that's what our normal is now. But when we look at the diversity of vegetables humans used to eat, it's like way, way more diverse than what we eat now. So magnesium, typically we can't get enough in food. I definitely recommend supplementing that. B complex, you might not need to supplement if you're eating like a really well-rounded healthy diet. Although, like I said, I see it low a lot for people despite doing that. L-theanine, you can get some in green tea. Phosphatidylserine, we get a little bit in food, but and we make it in our body too, but it gets depleted with stress. So some of these are like, if you're looking for natural options, like we don't need ashwagandha, right? But we can use that therapeutically as something to help with calming if we're feeling anxious or not sleeping well a lot. So it's like it's an alternative to a medication or something like that. So that's why we would maybe pick that up if we were having trouble with those symptoms. Hopefully that answered your question. I know we're almost at the end of our time. So if you have a question, throw it in the chat box. If I do have an email list where I send out articles and upcoming talks and events. So if you want to be added to that email list, just put like email and then your email address in the chat box and I'll do that. I have some blogs on my website, so you can always check that out, see if you find some new info there. And thank you so much for having me. I love doing these classes and want to apologize for jumping on right as we were starting. I had an appointment that went a little long. I think we got it all in. Any extra questions? Best way to attempt to try these items without killing one's budget. Yeah, it is tough to know for sure if you're going to have a adverse reaction to a supplement. I mean, if you know some people who have some, that's probably the cheapest way, is to just borrow a few capsules and try them. There are some, I would go to like a health food store because some of them will have samples that they will give out, or they will have like, you know, prepackaged little samples. So that's one way to try it. And then also talk to, you know, ask questions or read a little more, because some of them have a low amount of side effects. So it's easier to try than other things. All right.
Well, all right. Thank you very much, friends. Thank you for participating. Brooke will be back again in a few months. And in the meantime, next month, we have 4-part series on Ayurvedic medicine, if you are interested. Thank you so much, Brooke, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
You copy the chat